Okay, welcome to month 9, page 18. Up until this point, even though we've been working with triangles and flying geese, we haven't had to worry about too much bias, okay? Because we construct our half square triangles 2 at a time, we construct our flying geese with the 4 at a time method, and that really helps us work with almost no bias. We're working with squares and then cutting them, and then they're squares again, rectangles, all good. This is the first time that we're dealing with a lot of bias, okay? And one of the things that really can help when you deal with bias is by stabilizing your fabric. And stabilizing your fabric means using some kind of starch product to manage it. There are hundreds of starch products out there. You can use your favorite. Starching is, of course, personal preference. Here at the shop, for our convenience, we use Mary Ellen's Best Press. It is a synthetic, and we always use the scent-free because we have a refill program here. And the reason I like the synthetic in Hawaii, particularly over something like Niagara or Stay Flow, is a lot of those products are made with a plant starch. And in Hawaii, if you have plant starch, plant kind of things on fabric, it will attract bugs. The nice thing about this is it doesn't attract bugs, okay? If you are going to use a plant starch on your quilts, anywhere, honestly, but especially in Hawaii, you're going to have to wash them before you give them away or hang them, because you do want all the plant starch product, whether it's cornstarch or potato starch, out of the quilt, out of your fabric before you give it away. Less worry with the synthetic. And mostly, again, Hawaii is like the world of how many bugs can exist. Okay, so I use a Mary Ellen's Best Press. I have what I call a starching bucket. This is a, diffusion spray, like anything, or an aerosol, and stuff goes everywhere. I used to actually put out a big white piece of fabric under my my ironing board, and spray, and then iron, move it, spray, and then iron, and then I just found that, there would still be guck all over my floor. I would have a huge waste of product ending up not on my fabric. So I started using a starching bucket. I find that a rectangular bucket is better than a round bucket. I tried a round 5-gallon bucket, not so happy. Okay, so what I do with my starching bucket is I get my fabric, and I, width of fabric, length of fabric, whatever size you're working on, and I am going to drop my fabric into the bucket and start spraying. And as I spray to wet the fabric, you're going to see a color change, and then I'm just going to keep spraying and layering the fabric until this piece is done, and then I'm going to let that sit in the bottom of my bucket. I will starch maybe 4 or 5 pieces of fabric, okay? And these are about half a yard. I would do 3/4 of a yard, 1 yard. But what's nice about using a bucket is you can see that all the starch product or all the stabilizing product is going on your fabric. I accordion it back and forth. I make sure it's wet. When I get to my next piece, these are soaking in the stabilizing agent. And, I'll do, like I said, 3, 4, 5 pieces. And when I iron, I just starched all of these. When I iron, I flip over to the bottom, and I start with the first fabric that I sprayed. So that has given the time for the stabilizer to soak into the fabric, and now it's ready for ironing, okay? And while I'm ironing, these are allowing time for soaking. And that way you get a better distribution of the stabilizer through the fabric, and it works for me, okay? So our cutting instructions are to cut a 14-inch square of fabric. Now, most of our rulers, it is very rare, unless you're a ruler addict or own a fabric shop, to have a large 14 by 14 by a 14 and a half by 14 and a half ruler or larger. Most of our squaring rulers are 12 and a half by 12 and a half. A lot of our rulers are 6 and a half by 24 and a half. So how do you get a 14-inch square? So I have my fabric here. It would have been ironed and starched. And what I'm going to do is show you how I can use two rulers to get some different cuts on our fabric. So I like to have my fabric folded in fourths. It just makes it easier. You do not have to, okay? But when I am looking to make a 14-inch cut, I am first going to square my fabric on the right side with my ruler. I'm going to make sure that this is square, either along the selvage or the fold, okay? I'm going to take this ruler and I'm going to find number 14. And I'm going to put that number 14, now I'm right-handed, if you're left-handed, you're doing it in the opposite direction. I'm going to put that 14 on the side I squared, okay? I'm right-handed, I'm going to cut with this hand. I'm going to take a second ruler, and it doesn't have to be my square ruler. You can use your 6 and a half by 12 and a half if it's folded this way. And I'm going to butt that ruler right against this ruler, okay? I'm going to make sure it's lined up along the selvage or the fold, whichever is my landmark for the horizontal. I'm going to make sure that this hasn't moved, because when you butt this up, sometimes you can push a little too hard. But what you really want to do is make sure this is holding steady, and you just bring this right up to the end. When you move this, this is your cut for the 14. Okay, so now you have a 14-inch strip. So you're going to take that 14-inch strip, of which I have one. I was cutting a lot of stuff. Okay, so this is my 14-inch strip. I'm going to fold it in half. I'm going to move this. I'm going to cut off the selvage, right? Make sure that that's square. I'm going to again line up my 14 on the edge. Take this, butt it up against it, and when I cut here, I'm going to get a 14-inch square. Okay? So once you get that 14-inch square, you're going to take it and cut it diagonal and diagonal to make the triangles for the next section of your quilt. You'll be making a whole bunch of these, what do you call them? Hourglasses. Okay? And you're going to make the hourglasses with these cut squares. Okay, so from these triangles, you are going to be making 16 identical hourglass pieces that are made up of 4 different triangles. So your instructions have you sewing fabric 2 and fabric 8 together, and fabric 7 and fabric 9 together. When you sew these, you're going to want to start from the middle and sew out. Now remember, you're sewing with a lot of bias, so you don't want to stretch this, and you want to start in the middle, because we're going to trim these, so what happens on the ends is going to be okay. You know, especially if we did the first step of starching, these are going to be really stable. So you're going to sew from the center out and the center out. You're going to press either to the pinks or away from the pinks so that you can get this center here to the seam will nest. Okay, so in this case, when I sew these together, another good idea, again, we're dealing with triangles. These are fairly big triangles with a lot of bias. When you nest these, you can start by dropping your needle into the center and then sewing out to one direction, starting in the center, sewing out in the other direction. So any bias weirdness will end up on the outsides before you open these up, and then trim to 12.5 by 12.5. Now, if you have a 12.5 inch by 12.5 inch square, that's awesome. Remember, squaring from the center, that this is the 6 1/4 by 6 1/4 point. So you might want to take your ruler, put a little Scotch tape on the 6 1/4 and 6 1/4, so you know where the center of your hourglass is every time. Okay, so 16 of these, your pieces from earlier, page 17. We only have 2 more months of packets of fabric coming at you. Very, very excited. We're so close to the end, people. Yay! Okay, see you next month.